Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandy Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandy Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. In traditional therapy, we learn just as much from others' breakthroughs as we do from our own. And so today we will unpack a transformation that every revenue leader wants, but few achieve. Sales and marketing misalignment isn't just frustrating, it is expensive. When teams operate in silos, leads slip through the cracks, deals stall, and messaging feels like a game of telephone. Jamie Walsh has faced this exact challenge, and a reactive, fractured go-to-market approach that kept the business stuck in inefficiency mode. Instead of accepting the status quo, he built a proactive, revenue-aligned machine, one where sales and marketing co-own success, messaging is consistent, and execution is seamless. How did he break the cycle of friction and actually make alignment work? Let's find out. And so to help us unpack this, I am joined by Jamie Walsh. Jamie has been in go-to-market for over 10 years in B2B SaaS, with several scale-ups going to 100 million and those on the journey to 1 billion. He has driven 100 million plus in revenue over the past 5 years. Jamie, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Thank you, Brandy. Pleasure to see you.
I am excited to talk to you. Sales and marketing alignment feels like one of those challenges that has existed since the beginning of time. But before we dive into that, our industry loves its fancy jargon, but let's be real. Some of the buzzwords are just fluff, and, they can hold us back more than they can help. So, Jamie, tell me, what is one overused buzzword you'd love to erase from existence?
Geez, I think optimize. Who wants to degrade anything? So when you see optimize, I feel like it's a given. It's just well overused. The only other one that comes to mind is streamline. It's neck and neck between the two of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually we streamline as a part of the effort to optimize. Yeah. So I can say, at least for this conversation, we can put both those words in the box and throw away the key. And so now that we have cleared out the fluff, let's get into the real stuff, which is your big win. And so let's start at the beginning. What was the challenge that you were facing, and how did you know that you had a problem?
Yeah, well, I think it seems to be a common thing from companies that have been in enterprise SaaS for quite some time. They've been given edicts. Marketing does this thing, product does this thing, sales does, their thing. They're supposed to be working together, but and a lot of times when the things hit the fan, right? They go in different directions, and then poor customer success. They inherit the mess after the fact, and they've got to make a customer happy. Maybe turn them into advocates at some point. But it's not a new problem. It's just one of those things where the more you get people to work on the same page and understand the same goals and realize that we share the journey from a customer, from start to finish, you become a little bit more of a cohesive team, really. It becomes a lot more of us versus, those guys over there, those guys over there. So
Yeah, and I do think it is one of those things. I can remember many, many moons ago in couples therapy, the therapist had said, you have to think of it as us versus the problem and
yeah,
not me versus you. And I really think that that is very necessary for sales and marketing, whatever the challenges are, not having that finger pointing, but really thinking about us as a revenue team against the business challenge. And so, in the scenario where you were able to overcome this, what was your initial understanding of the business challenge? And did that change as you worked through it?
yeah. So before coming aboard the company, I talked with the VP of marketing who would eventually hire me, and to just discuss the state of things. And um, this was a company that had just recently divested from a very large company, parent company. Prior to that, they were acquired by a private equity company who was actually in the growth mode for them, investing a lot of money into the company. And I know that investments like that come with even bigger expectations. So whatever got you there ain't going to get you to the next rung or to where they want you to be. And the company had been growing modestly up to that point. It had been, doing things to think about like 25, 30%. But the product marketing function that I was taking over just needed to scale. Processes were going to have to evolve. There was a lot of Gen AI that was just coming on board. This was, right after ChatGPT was launched. So we would have to find some things to make it work for us. We were going to have to address a number of different inefficiencies that were, plaguing the company or holding them back. And we eventually just agreed on 4 key priorities that we were going to be focusing on. And that was great because it gave me an opportunity to really build a plan and hit the ground running and know where I was going to be or where I should be within the first quarter, within the first 90 days. And so I came into it, understanding that the size of the problem and the size of the expectations. There were some other things that I would eventually learn as I moved on.
Okay. And so once you identified the issue, what was your strategy or approach to fix it?
Well, I mean, I came from a unique background. I had grown up with a company prior to this for 10 years, and I had moved through customer success. I was given a principal consultant role to handle a couple of our biggest accounts, and so that came with a lot of experience, understanding the pressure of doing certain things to make customers happy, and working on the back end with product to get things done. But I also became a product manager, which gave me a lot of insight on that aspect of the go-to-market 4 horsemen, as I call it. And I was successful at that as well. And they moved me into sales sales engineering leadership, which gave me an even better appreciation for what salespeople have to go through and how you actually close big deals. And then moving into the product marketing role, I was able to really craft narratives that helped win business and really, amplify that in a number of different ways. So, basically, the way I was going to tackle it was just having empathy and talking with a number of different groups, and really understanding their motivations. Having been in their shoes, I think bought a lot of credibility and bought a lot of trust that I was going to be the one to help bring everything together. And it was going to be on me to make sure that we got things done and we were meeting their needs as deals were going through, as customers were going into escalations, or product was having a challenge delivering to their needs.
And it's interesting because it sounds so simple when you say it that way, in that you led with empathy and you had conversations with people to, help them see that we were all going to move through this collectively. And it's so funny because I often feel like the sales and marketing battle and the misalignment happens so frequently, and it does often happen because these conversations are not taking place, and it has that mentality, or has that feeling of us versus them. And so I'd love to dig in a bit more in, I know you said that the business had aggressive growth goals, but were there other challenges that you were seeing that led you to feel that it was the alignment between the different go-to-market functions that was really creating the problem? Like, why this versus believing the problem was something different?
Yeah, so it immediately becomes evident when you see the interaction between product marketing and sales. When you're being reactive to individual deals, and hyper reactive, and creating a bunch of new collateral, doing a bunch of new things without really stopping to ask, why are we doing this? It becomes just disruptive to the bigger picture. I talked to people right off the bat, and I said, look, I really understand this, the challenge that you have. This salesperson's deal, their whole, commission for the year can depend on that. But unfortunately, you have to take a step back and say, I'm not necessarily building a program that's reactive to one deal. I'm proactively building a program that is going to serve us as 10 to 100 deals over the next quarter or two. So we really need to stop running around to do certain things at last minute, or pulling all-nighters to do stuff that is distracting us from getting ahead of ourselves and getting ahead of where we need to be as a program. It just was burning people out, quite frankly. And I said, we're going to take a step back. There's going to be some things that we continue to react to, but over time, we are going to be much less reactive, if reactive at all, and more proactive in saying, these are the big things that we're going to be focusing on. There's only 4 or 5 of them. It's not 30. And we are going to then all agree that these are priority, and anything that comes along that's going to disrupt us from that, we all have to agree that something off this list has to go.
Yeah, I think every marketer at some point in their career has gotten that fire drill of sales needing that so critical one-sheeter that everybody runs around to create, that gets seen by one prospect and then goes to die. But I mean, I definitely agree that it is important to stop focusing on kind of the needs of one and really have that alignment and focus on the needs of the whole. Like, what are the priority things? And a lot of people can find it hard, to say, okay, these are our priorities. If you want to put something else on the table, what is it that we are taking off? And, if everyone has that same mentality of, we've got to get to the greater good for the organization, you can get there. Did you have easy buy-in from all the players, or were there any, challenges to getting people on the same page?
Yeah, well, there was a couple of different things that were going on. So there were, as there always are, large pivots to certain things that go on. As you're building a plan, it doesn't happen overnight. If you're building sort of a 6-month or an annual marketing plan, the budget has to come first to figure out how much are we going to be spending, what are our goals and targets. And it takes sometimes a month or two to really flesh that out. And as things change during that period, you have to kind of go back to the drawing board. But I think the bigger thing is that culturally, there were some new folks coming in, and that I had ideas and were brought in specifically to challenge some of the status quo. And then there were a lot of people that had been there for 7+ years that had been doing certain things a certain way, and while like I said, they did have, some modest success. That's why the PE company was attracted to them. But nonetheless, the expectations were going to go up dramatically, and that kind of stuff could not sustain them for that growth. And we weren't saying that we were going to disassociate from everything, but there were going to be things that we looked at and just said, look, this is, unless you can prove to me that this is 10xing in returns, we just have some other things we're going to try in addition to that. And if they do, pan out to be a better return, then we are going to forfeit some of those other things we're going to be doing. I did have a lot of good leadership support throughout that process. I was, finding quick wins, working with some of the top salespeople. That's you kind of have to start there, because once you get alignment there and you can align with what they're doing, that's actually producing results, then it all sort of trickles down from there. Everybody kind of buys in there, but you have to have a partnership, and it can't be necessarily that servant leadership sort of thing. It's like, we are partners together. There's some things that I have done in the past that are going to work, that may not work here, but we're going to try them. There are some things that you've been doing that are working so far, but they are maybe not going to get us to that next level that we need to go. And so those are sort of two big things. Probably, just getting over that hurdle. There was some risk appetites of change that you have to overcome, and I think that it's nothing new. Everybody's kind of has a little hesitancy to change. I don't know anybody that's like, yeah, let's just change everything to tomorrow. But had to have a big bet, but also have some rationale behind why that big bet could, in fact, play very well there.
And it's interesting you brought up like looking at getting that buy-in from some of your top sales reps as a key first step. Reflecting on my own journey, that the time that I had to overcome a similar challenge of not getting sales to want to change, to want to move forward. That was exactly what we did in that organization. We had a new approach, and we started with the top 3 salespeople. We got them to agree to pilot what we were looking to do, and it was really effective. And what ended up happening is, when they were doing their meetings and reflecting on deals and how they're moving and things like that, and other people heard that, they were doing this new thing, it was almost like everybody else got offended that, well, I'm not winning because I don't have this new thing. And so it went from marketing fighting an uphill battle to get sales to try something different to almost, sales at marketing's door with pitchforks, like, why didn't I get this? You're holding me back. And then it was like, oh, okay, you could have it too. And so that is, we didn't do it intentionally for that reason, but that, ended up being the outcome.
I would argue that you have to kind of be intentional to do that, right? Is that when you force things upon everybody, you get such resistance, and not malicious sabotage, but sometimes people drag their feet because they know that if it doesn't work out right away, that you can sort of turn the tides. So when you find those allies, right, and you can get them on board, and I didn't have to look hard. There were some people out there that were just looking for our help, and I was like, okay, let's do this, and we'll give you some really good deal support on this particular deal, or we will do some things to test this out or listen in. I did a lot of ride-alongs, and instead of jumping in and sales meetings, I would text the sales engineer or the rep themselves and say, hey, I just heard this, try saying this, or this is something that might work. And sometimes they would do it, and sometimes they wouldn't. And it was just not necessarily jumping in and doing it for them, but giving them that support was very helpful. And it becomes contagious, right? Like when that starts to work for 1 or 2, like you said, they're fighting over each other to get that attention. You're like, okay, there was a reason why I didn't want to do this, because I knew that if it worked for this person, then it would work for other people, and versus showing everybody that they have to do it this way, and majority of people, poo-pooing it, whatever.
Yeah, and just in general, when you're trying to, test things, I mean, I think starting with a solid sample size of, what gives us the best opportunity for this approach working, and then even just being able to take that, iterate, for that's where we can streamline and optimize, pulling in our buzzwords, before you then roll it out to other people. That also tends to work better because it's easier to kind of work through some of the kinks of any approach with a smaller group. Have you seen the
Right.
same?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have to pick the right people, right? Because if you pick a poor performer and it doesn't work out well, was it the program or the process, or was it the performer, right? And so there's when you choose correctly, you're like, okay, this is either going to make a good performer bad, or it's going to make a good performer even better, and I'll be okay with either of those outcomes. But the other one leaves you with so much doubt that you just, it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah. And so what was the overall business outcome? You created alignment, you got focus on the priorities. What was the measurable impact that this solution had on the business?
Yeah, well, ultimately, we achieved, the target for the year. I came in around half of the year, and I made a decision that I wasn't going to really enforce or make dramatic changes on day one, but there were some things that were being added to the fold, such as competitive enablement program. I had already built one from scratch. This one was actually built on top of technology that we had purchased, and so uh, that was a very quick win. There was a lot of people looking for battle cards for and competitive intel on a number of our competitors. We were in a landscape that had about, I would say, probably 50 to 60 competitors that we would see at any given time. And I said, okay, that's good, but we're going to focus on the top five and really go deep on those five. And got that up and running within a quarter. And within that first quarter after it was launched, we saw a dramatic change in that. I think there was one of the deals that we were working on was the largest deal in company history
Oh,
that just
wow.
landed. And we had a couple of different ways that we were going to approach competitive enablement. And one of them was what I called strategic deal support. This was obviously met the criteria for that. It was pretty large. It was in an industry that was in our ideal customer profile. I had a champion there. She was one of those top performing salespeople, but it was a really tough deal. We found out late in the game that we were up against two really strong competitors, but we were able to leverage some of our external partners to help give us some insight from the outside in on what we did well and what we did wrong, and just brought people together to roll up our sleeves and put together a really great presentation that made them forget about the other two competitors that we were up against.
That's awesome. That is
Yeah,
definitely a big win.
yeah.
And so, one of the best parts of learning from others is understanding what really made the difference. So, before we wrap up, let's make sure our listeners walk away with insights they can use right away. And so, if you were talking to someone with the same challenge that you were before solving this, what's the first thing you'd tell them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is having clarity on the objectives, right? You come in, identify what are the biggest four problems, 3 or 4 problems that you have to tackle in a very short period of time, like 90 days, because I think that's attainable. And it's also something that people will notice really quickly about you. Having that identified and building a plan so that you can really hit the ground running and be successful in that time period, I think is really critical. But the other thing is that efficiency really starts with that alignment. Meeting everybody, giving them a high level overview of like what you're going to do and how you're going to operate is kind of key. They don't need to necessarily get down into the minutia. What they need to know is at the end of this, part of the launch, we are going to be giving you this, this, and this. And during the strategy development part, we are going to be involving you. And I like to use consent over consensus, because it's difficult to get a lot of people, especially in a large organization, to all agree. And you kind of need to move fast and say, hey, we're going to leave ourselves room to iterate, and I'm going to be monitoring the things as they progress in the execution. And we're going to be able to refine things as we go. It doesn't have to be perfect right now, but we're not going to wait for that perfection. We're going to make progress and not perfection.
I love that, consent versus consensus. And so, Jamie, I really appreciate you joining me. And, every good session ends with a plan for progress. So I love that. And so where can our audience find you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, I focus a lot of my time on LinkedIn. In fact, just yesterday, I'm going to get rid of X, Instagram, and Facebook off my phone, just to keep the distractions off my mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely have been reducing my overall social media usage as well, and really still find a lot of value in LinkedIn. So much great information. So wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, make sure you check the show notes. We will link to Jamie's LinkedIn. Well, Jamie, thank you again for joining me.
Absolutely, Brandy. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed my conversation with Jamie. I can't believe we're at the end. Until next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandy Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.